Although governments hid the data, the buried patents remained untouched. But because the results threatened corporate profits, the files disappeared completely. When the French inventor planted a simple wire, surrounding crops tripled. As a copper collected atmospheric electricity, the dying soil instantly came to life. While modern farmers buy synthetic chemicals, nature provides free energy. If we do not reveal these forgotten documents, the agricultural monopoly will continue. Since the physics remains completely unchanged, anyone can replicate these methods. Before you plant your next seed this spring, you must understand this technology. Although he was ridiculed by the scientific community, the harvest proved his theory. If you apply this 19th century secret, your garden will be transformed overnight. Justin Christophe was not a household name in the world of science. He was a farmer, experimenter, and tireless inventor. Born in France in 1865, by the early 1920s, he had been pursuing for decades the single idea that plants could thrive not only on nutrients from the soil, but also on the invisible energy drawn from the sky. On October 26, 1925, Christophe filed a patent in Switzerland for what he called an electromagnetic terrestrial apparatus. Document number CH118648A issued the following. May described a system of copper and magnetic steel plates designed to capture atmospheric electricity and direct it into the earth. This was not some basement experiment. The patent is still in the archives, a legal artifact that details every wire, every plate, every connection. Christophe's drive came from the fields themselves. He claimed that with his device, oats grew up to 5 feet in height, and old dying trees burst into life again. Photos from the mid-20s show vegetables that seem to belong to another world. Pumpkins are wider than barrels. Cabbage is almost human-sized. These images published in Justin's books and pamphlets fueled rumors of a breakthrough that defied all rules of soil science. The British Committee on Electric, created in 1918 under the hautes pates of the Ministry of Agriculture, drew attention to Christophe's work. By the early 20s, the committee was collecting reports, studying photographs of crops, and sending observers to sites throughout Europe. Their mandate was simple: to separate fact from fiction. For nearly 2 decades until 1936, the committee collected field photographs, crop records, and testimonies from inventors like Christophe. Their interim reports, marked not for publication, catalogued everything from giant stalks of barley to strange devices appearing in French gardens. Despite the striking visual evidence, the committee's files show a pattern of unanswered questions. The original negatives or independent verifications of the most dramatic images have never surfaced. The photographs, while compelling, have always teetered between proof and legend. For every snapshot of a record harvest, there was a lingering doubt. One red not for publication seal locked away the committee's findings. The final volumes, filled with years of field test data and correspondence, disappeared into government archives. Only 2 copies are known to have survived time. The rest were taken out of circulation, boxed up and forgotten forever. Every piece of open land from a city park to a rural field lies beneath an invisible river of electricity. The air above our heads holds a constant charge, positive in the sky and negative in the soil below. Physicists call this the atmospheric potential gradient. On a clear day, the difference between sky and ground is about 100 volts for every meter of height. It is not lightning, not a blow that can be felt, but a quiet tension, always flowing like a gentle tide. The plants are right in the middle of this field. Their leaves and stems, covered with microscopic hairs and wax, act as natural conductors. Every blade of grass, every bean sprout silently collects an electrical charge from the air. Roots buried in the ground are connected to the negative pole of this giant natural battery. The plant itself becomes a living antenna, bridging the gap between sky and soil. This is not just a poetic image. The flow of electricity is measurable. In some experiments, a copper rod stuck into the ground registers a small current. Evidence that air and ground exchange charge even on a calm day. The voltage gradient may change with the weather, but the basic pattern remains sky positive, ground negative, a difference that never sleeps. Copper wire is much more conductive than a stem or leaf planted in the ground and can attract atmospheric charge more effectively. By the early 20s, the business of growing food was about to change forever. Plants in Germany and the United States began producing synthetic ammonia on a scale the world had never seen. The Haber-Bosch process, once a military secret, now filled railroad cars and cargo ships with bags of chemical fertilizer. Production soared from just over 1 million tons per year to nearly 20 million tons by 1960, driving the price of ammonia from $100 per ton to less than $30 per ton. The real innovation was not in the chemistry, but in the business model. Farmers who once relied on compost or disposable copper wire now face a new kind of contract. Buy fertilizer every spring or risk a smaller harvest. A subscription was built in. Every season, another purchase. Every year, another bill. The market swelled as more growers signed up, lured by the promise of larger yields and easy application. The fertilizer industry became a giant with profits tied to annual sales rather than long-lasting solutions. In this new economy, a method that worked forever with one piece of wire was not just an alternative, it was a threat. Editors and academics drew the line, and newspaper columns began to treat electroculture as a curiosity rather than a competitor. In recent years, the search for evidence has moved from old patents and garden photographs to vast tracts of farmland. In China, researchers from the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences decided to test the idea of atmospheric electricity on a scale that had never been attempted. Their experiment covered 3,600 hectares, an area larger than 6,000 football fields. The plant did not rely on fertilizers or pesticides, but instead used the natural electrical field between heaven and earth as the early pioneers had imagined, but on a scale capable of feeding a city. The results were hard to ignore. Yields increased by almost 30% across all trial fields. This meant more wheat, more rice, more vegetables without adding a single drop of synthetic fertilizer. The most surprising result was not just larger harvests. Pesticide use dropped dramatically, in some cases by 70 to 100%. A study by the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences brought the concept of electroculture into institutional science with numbers large enough to drown out claims of coincidence. The data showed that plants, by tapping into the Earth's natural currents, could thrive on the energy that was always there, free, quiet, and waiting just above the soil. A simple copper coil planted in the soil can transform any backyard into a living experiment. The method is not complicated, but accuracy matters. Start with a piece of 14-gauge bare copper wire about the thickness of a strong paperclip. Wrap it in a loose spiral, aiming for a diameter between 5 and 20 centimeters. Some homeowners use a wooden dowel 12 to 16 millimeters wide as a mold to maintain the uniformity of the coil. The finished spiral must have at least 3 turns arranged so that air and light pass through the gaps. Once formed, drive the dowel into the soil so that the spiral is 10 to 15 centimeters deep with the top end pointing just above the surface. The critical detail is that the tip of the spiral must face magnetic north. A cheap compass will do the job. Don't skip this step. Telluric earth currents flow from north to south, and the orientation can mean the difference between a healthy gain and no effect at all. Place the coil 10 to 20 centimeters from the base of your plant. Tomatoes, beans, and squash respond well, but some gardeners report the most dramatic results with leafy greens. In 1841, a Scottish watchmaker named Alexander Bain filed a patent that quietly rewrote the rules of electricity. Instead of relying on expensive chemical batteries, Bain buried 2 plates, 1 zinc, and 1 copper in damp soil, and connected them with wire. The result was a steady current drawn not from acid or salt water, but from the earth itself. This was not a parlor trick or a passing experiment. Bain's installation powered the world's first electric clock, its pendulum swinging from energy lured from the soil. His patent, British patent number 8763, described how two plates of different metals placed in moist soil could drive gears and electromagnets without the need for winding or refueling. Bain's earth battery was not just a new addition to the workshop. It found its way into the heart of Victorian telegraphy. Telegraph stations across Britain began using buried copper and zinc plates to send signals along single wires with the soil itself acting as a return path. In Hyde Park and along the Edinburgh-Glasgow Railway, buried Bain plates provided clean low-voltage current, often around 1 volt per cell. These setups weren't just theoretical. Engineers documented how aligning the plates from north to south could increase power output. Reports began to circulate among telegraph workers and local farmers in wet fields where copper and zinc plates lay buried under the grass. Something strange was happening. Telegraph lines hummed quietly overhead, but it was the ground itself that attracted attention. The strip of grass that ran between the hidden plates stood out darker, thicker, and taller than areas just a few feet away. There were no bags of fertilizer, no secret compost, just the quiet presence of two metals and the slow seepage of current through the ground. No scientific paper documented these changes. Instead, the story spread by word of mouth. The Yorkshire station master pointed to a lush strip running along a buried telegraph return. A caretaker in Essex joked that the grass seemed to know where the wires were. Decades later, a Connecticut doctor named George Starr White took notice. White was no ordinary country doctor. He spent his career pursuing the unseen forces of nature, convinced that electricity in the soil could open up new possibilities for agriculture. In the early 20th century, he began to promote the idea that natural earth currents, what he called to electricity, could be used to increase crop yields. His lectures and pamphlets described experiments where weak currents directed through the earth seemed to spark life into tired fields. Copper and zinc, placed in moist soil, do more than just sit quietly underground. They trigger a chemical reaction that turns the earth itself into a living chain. The science behind this is called galvanic action. Zinc, a more reactive metal, begins to lose electrons. These electrons travel through a wire connected above ground, searching for a copper plate. The soil acts as a bridge carrying charged ions between two metals. This flow of electrons represents a direct current. In the right conditions, moist, slightly acidic soil, the voltage between copper and zinc can reach anywhere from 0.8 to 1.1 volt. It's not much, but it's enough to trigger a chain of changes underground. This weak but steady current begins to break down the chemical bonds in the soil. Plants, it turns out, can sense this tension. Their roots are not just passive straws sucking up water and minerals. Decades of research into plant physiology have shown that roots actually respond to electric fields in a phenomenon called electrorapism. In controlled laboratory experiments, roots bend and grow toward a cathode copper plate. When exposed to even tiny voltage gradients, some research suggests that roots can detect fields as weak as 1 molt per centimeter. The effect is subtle in the wild, but in a garden with copper and zinc plates, roots are drawn to the area where nutrients are most mobile. By the dawn of the 20th century, the quiet current flowing beneath the soil was no longer the only force shaping agriculture. A new player entered the field, synthetic fertilizers, and he rewrote the economics of farming. In 1909, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch cracked the code for extracting nitrogen from the air, turning it into ammonia on an industrial scale. By 1913, the first Haber-Bosch plant was operating in Germany, and soon the promise of cheap, plentiful nitrogen swept across Europe and North America. What once required years of crop rotation or tons of manure could now be achieved with 1 bag of white crystals. The fertilizer industry wasn't just selling a product. It was selling a new way of thinking about soil. Advertising in the 20s and 30s promised record harvests and easy abundance, all for the price of a seasoned supply. Agricultural newsletters, supported by government agencies like the USDA, began to promote what they called NPK nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, as the fundamental trinity of modern agriculture. The message was simple. Healthy soil was not something you spent years growing, but something you could buy, spread, and repeat. Farmers faced with pressure to feed growing populations and compete in national markets saw the appeal. Synthetic fertilizers were reliable, measurable, and most importantly, repeatable. Each harvest meant another sale. The economy favoring products that ran out rather than systems that lasted forever. The shift was more technological. It was cultural. A backyard gardener stands over 2 rows of lettuce. One row has a copper tube and galvanized nail buried in the soil, connected by a wire above the ground. Another row grows without any metal at all. After 4 weeks, the difference is obvious. Electrified lettuce is taller with leaves that spread wider and show a deeper green color. Digital scales confirm the change. The average wet biomass in the electrified row is 38 grams per plant compared to 26 grams in the control. The multimeter touches the copper and zinc. The screen blinks, then stabilizes at 1.300 TAS of a volt. This is the same range that gardeners report on forums and YouTube tests of 0.8 to 1.1 volt. Depending on soil moisture and pH, you may already have both metals in your pocket. Before 1982, every American penny was 95% copper. After 1982, they switched to zinc under a thin copper shell. Line up 2 pennies, one from 1979, the other from 1984. At first glance, they are twins, but tip them onto a hard surface, and the illusion is shattered. The old penny rings bright and clear like a tiny bell. The new one lands with a flat, heavy thud. In 1974, 2 researchers published photographs that violated a completely different rule. Radishes 3 times their normal size. Cucumbers ripening 2 weeks ahead of schedule. No copper, no zinc, no battery at all. Just one magnet. Albert Roy Davis and Walter R.W.S. presented black and white photographs that challenge the rules of plant biology. On one plate, a cluster of radishes sits next to a control group. The difference not subtle. Magnet-treated radishes are inflated to almost 3 times the mass of their untreated counterparts. The signature claims an increase of 200 to 300%. Achieved without a single drop of fertilizer, without special soil, without chemical reinforcement, with just one magnet placed with scientific care. A few pages later, another plate captures a row of cucumber vines. The vines exposed to the south pole of the magnet already heavy with fruit. Each image is numbered, labeled, and accompanied by handwritten notes with dates, weights, and exact installation details. The plates make no secret of their ambition. They invite examination, offering a direct visual challenge to the idea that plant growth is driven solely by chemistry. The scale of the anomaly is undeniable. These are not minor improvements. The results are reported to be orders of magnitude greater than what conventional gardening would expect from any single intervention. The photographs remain the heart of the statement. They do not explain how the effect works or why. They simply show what happened when the rules were broken by a force that cannot be seen. Philip Callahan has spent his career studying the silent signals hidden in the earth. As a radar technician turned entomologist, he noticed something special while surveying the fields of Ireland and the volcanic slopes of Hawaii. The most fertile soils, those that produced lush harvests year after year, shared a physical trait unrelated to nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium. They were paramagnetic. These soils could be attracted, albeit slightly, by a strong magnet, not enough to jump off the ground, but enough to register on a sensitive instrument. Callahan measured this property in CGS units, a standard for magnetic susceptibility. The fertile volcanic ash or soil of the Nile Delta often showed results above a Thich 00 and CGS. In contrast, depleted farmland or industrial sand barely registered above 50. In a practical sense, a handful of dark volcanic soil would drift toward the magnet while a scoop of depleted dirt would sit motionless. He called this the soil antenna effect. Each particle of paramagnetic rock acted like a tiny radio antenna tuned to the planet's background energy. These minerals, basalt, granite, and certain clays, captured and stored the Earth's natural electromagnetic impulses. In Callahan's vision, the roots exploited this field, extracting not only minerals, but also a kind of electrical power. Where paramagnetism was high, crops grew faster, resisted disease, and required less water. Where it was low, even the best fertilizers could not revive the earth for a long time. Water, the silent partner in every harvest, moves through the soil and roots in ways that are easily overlooked. But Magneto claims something extraordinary. A simple magnet could change the very nature of water. In the laboratory journals of Davis and RUS and later field tests in the 70s, water passed through a magnetic field became thinner, less sticky, absorbed faster, and was easier on plants. The statement was bold, but the mechanism was simple. The magnets, especially the South Pole, broke up clusters of water molecules, reducing surface tension by 30 to 40%. Modern studies, although more conservative, have put these figures to the test. Peer-reviewed trials from Egypt, Turkey, and Iran used tensometers to measure the effect. The results showed a consistent reduction in the surface tension of the water, sometimes 15%, sometimes 25% lower than untreated water. In practical terms, magnetized water travels faster through dry soil, penetrates root hairs with less resistance, and hydrates seedlings in less time. A 2020 university study reported 18% higher corn yields after a season of magnetic irrigation without additional fertilizer. Another greenhouse trial in Turkey found that beans sprouted 22% faster and grew taller when watered with magnetically treated water. These are not miracles. These are measurable benefits numbers that can be verified, repeated, and quoted. Always polarity. Each magnet has a north and south pole, but only one side accelerates growth. Place the compass flat on a table and hold one end of the magnet close to the needle. The north end of the arrow will be attracted to the south pole of the magnet. Mark this end clearly. An error between north and south will stop or even kill your seeds. This is not a detail that can be missed. The seed charging method is the simplest. Place your radish, bean, or cucumber seeds into a shallow dish. Then place them directly on the marked south pole of the magnet. Seal the container airtight to retain moisture. Leave the seeds for 24 hours. This window is critical. Too short and the effect is weakened. Too long and you risk drying out. After a day of planting as usual, expect to see sprouts up to 4 days faster. To energize water, attach a magnet to a garden hose with the south pole facing inward. Secure it with tape so that the water flows past the active surface. Keep the flow steady. No faster than 1.5 gallons per minute. Higher speeds will disrupt the field. To build a magnetic tree ring, bury 4 magnets in the soil with the south poles facing the trunk. Place them evenly in a circle about 1.5 meters from the base at a depth of 5 to 10 centimeters. This setup simulates the paramagnetic fields found in volcanic soils. At the peak of his career, Dr. Philip Callahan worked deep inside the USDA Southern Grain Insect Research Laboratory in Tiffin, Georgia. His official title was entomologist, but his expertise extended far beyond the world of beetles. Callahan trained as a radio technician in the United States Army Air Forces during World War II. That wartime experience of reading the language of radio waves shaped the questions he brought to the laboratory decades later. In the 60s, Callahan began studying insect antennae under powerful microscopes, looking for clues about how the pests found their targets. What he saw took him by surprise. The structure of the moths' and beetles' antennae did not appear random, but instead resembled the finely tuned arrays used in radar. Long repeating shafts covered with ridges and spikes placed at precise intervals. To Callahan, it wasn't just a biological oddity. It looked like engineering. Years of research led him to the radical hypothesis that insect antennae could act as dielectric waveguides capable of detecting electromagnetic signals far beyond ordinary smell or touch. Infrared cameras have revealed a hidden world in the garden. When a plant thrives, its leaves release heat in a steady, even stream of continuous field of energy. Under stress, this pattern breaks down, and drought, disease, or nutrient loss disrupts the plant's metabolism and water flow. The slug approaches the edge of the garden bed and begins to probe the soil in search of its next meal. Directly ahead, a piece of copper wire lies half buried in the damp soil. When the slug makes contact, its body bridges the gap between the copper and the moist soil, completing a natural circuit. A voltmeter attached to the wire detects a half-volt to 1-volt surge generated by the interaction of copper, mucus, and electrolytes in the soil. This is not a trick or wishful thinking. The chemistry is basic. Copper and slimy slug create a galvanic cell, the same principle that powers a battery. Within seconds, the slug recoils. Its retreat abrupt and unmistakable, often less than 2 seconds from first contact to retreat. The response is consistent across repeated trials, with even the bravest slugs leaving their path after touching the wire. Soil chemists measured this effect in controlled tests, recording stress curves and withdrawal times with precision. On average, slugs turn away within 1.5 to 2 seconds and rarely try to cross a second time. We can see the effect, measure it, and most importantly, repeat it. Unlike sprays or granules, which leave no evidence of action, copper wire offers clear evidence that anyone can verify. The mild electrical shock is harmless to the plant, but is enough to repel the slug by creating a living barrier with nothing more than a piece of metal and moisture already present in the soil. In Paris in 1923, George Lovsky stood among the rows of geraniums in the Jardin des Cléations with a copper wire in his hand. His experiment was simple. Plants infected with root canker tumors were given no medicine, no chemical treatment, just one loop of copper, open at one end, carefully placed around the stem. Lakhovsky called this an Osili circuit, inspired by the idea that every living cell vibrates like a tiny radio. By his own reports, the results were dramatic. Geraniums with copper coils survived and recovered, while untreated plants withered and died. Word of the demonstration quickly spread through French scientific circles and hit the press with headlines hinting at a new era in plant health. Lakhovsky published diagrams and descriptions in his book, The Resonating Universe, and filed patents describing the coil design as a simple loop rather than a closed ring, always with a visible gap. These early documents, preserved in the archives of the National Library of France, show the unmistakable shape of the Lakhovsky coil. Nearly a century later, the same pattern of one exposed copper loop remains at the center of every Electro-Ultra manual. The design has changed little since those first Parisian gardens, carrying the pedigree of its origins into modern hands. A century separates the Lakhovsky copper loop from the coils gardeners use today. But the design has barely changed. The global pesticide market is worth over $60 billion every year. It's not a side business. It's a financial engine that depends on gardeners and farmers coming back season after season for another round of chemicals. The logic is simple and ruthless. You spray to kill the bug, but the poison doesn't stop just at the bug. It stresses the plant, lowering its internal tension and weakening its natural defenses. This stress changes the plant's chemistry and energy field, making it more attractive to pests. The next wave of insects is not a coincidence. It is a direct result of the previous spraying. Industry reports and agricultural newsletters quietly acknowledge this cycle. Each application of a pesticide reduces the plant's resistance. When immunity declines, the plant sends out a stronger distress signal, whether through volatile compounds, weakened cell walls, or shifts in energy patterns. More pests arrive, attracted by the easy target. The solution, according to the industry, is always more product, new formula, stronger dose. Subscribe to the latest blend. It's a pesticide treadmill. 5 steps repeated endlessly. Spray, stress, honk, infect, repeat. The system doesn't reward healthy plants. It profits from sick ones. The more you fight, the more you buy. 4 methods. A century of buried evidence. Atmospheric electricity. earth batteries, magnetic fields, frequency coils. Each one has been patented, tested, and quietly put aside in favor of products you have to buy again every season. Physics never stopped working. The experiment is yours to conduct. Try one method, track your results. If it works, tell someone. The best way to unearth a forgotten science is to plant it in every garden outside. A copper coil costs less than a cup of coffee. 2 pennies from your pocket can create a living battery. A magnet from the dollar shelf can change the water forever. An open loop of copper wire can protect the plant from pests without a single drop of poison. The patents are still there in the archives, awaiting a new generation of experimenters. The numbers are real. The mechanisms are clear. The results are measurable. The only thing standing between you and the free energy from heaven and soil is the willingness to try. Start with one plant, one coil, one measurement. Document what you see. If the method works in your garden, it will work in your neighbor's too. If it works in your area, it will work everywhere. The best revolution doesn't start in a laboratory or factory. It starts in the dirt under your fingernails and in the data in your notebook. One seed at A.